Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I want to talk about an article I've just come across in Euronews regarding the debacle between Hungary, Slovakia, and Ukraine, as well as the EU, involving Hungary and Slovakia's veto over the 90 billion euro aid package to Ukraine. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hungary and Slovakia have vetoed the 90 billion euro aid package from the EU to Ukraine, citing Ukraine's sabotaging of the Druzhba pipeline, which supplied Hungary and Slovakia with cheap Russian oil. So Viktor Orban has claimed that the Ukrainians were responsible for sabotaging that pipeline, and as a result, the Hungarians are now unable to receive the cheap Russian oil that they have always been receiving, which has now resulted in Hungary and Slovakia beginning to dip into their 90-day oil reserves, which EU members usually keep as a backup. So he's leveled this criticism at Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine. However, Zelensky has hit back, saying that the pipeline was damaged not by the Ukrainians but by the Russians. Orban and Fico are not buying that. Ursula von der Leyen made a trip to Ukraine recently to mark the 4th anniversary of the hostilities in Ukraine, and was hoping to announce the delivery of the aid package to Ukraine, but that's been shelved as a result of the pushback by way of the veto from Slovakia and Hungary. However, there was an interesting development earlier today where I'm going to read the contents of this article. So there was an interesting development where the European Parliament had announced that it had signed off on the 90 billion euro package to Ukraine, circumnavigating the veto by Hungary and Slovakia. And this, as you can imagine, caused a flurry. X was set ablaze with reactions to this. And, many were saying that the Hungarians were simply bypassed and not taken into account, and that their veto did not matter. However, Euronews did an amazing article entitled Fact Check: Did the EU bypass Hungary's veto on Ukraine's 90 billion euro loan? And I'm going to put this article up here. Have a look at it. I urge you to go in and have a look at it because it's a brilliant article. It does a great breakdown of what actually happened as opposed to the insinuations drawn from an ex-post that was put up, which on the face of it seemed that Hungary's veto had been bypassed. So the article says, on the 24th of February, the European Parliament announced that it had signed off on a 90 billion euro loan to support Ukraine. On social media, some users claimed that this showed Brussels had overridden Hungary's opposition to the loan. However, this is only one part of the legislative process. A post on X by European Parliament President Roberta Metsola has triggered a wave of misinformation linked to the EU's 90 billion euro support loan to Ukraine, which is designed to help Kiev meet its general budget and defense needs amid Russia's ongoing invasion. The article goes on further. Hungary said earlier this week that it would block both the loan agreed by the EU leaders in December and a new EU sanctions package against Moscow amid a dispute over oil supplies. Shortly afterwards, METSOLA posted on X that she had signed the Ukraine support loan on behalf of the parliament. She said the funds would be used to maintain essential public services, support Ukraine's defense, protect shared European security, and anchor Ukraine's future within Europe. There's a clipping of Roberta Metsola's post on X, and Euronews then break down the facts of this. The announcement triggered a wave of reactions online, with some claiming Hungary's veto had been ignored, but this is incorrect. Metsola did sign the loan on behalf of the European Parliament, but that's only one step in the EU's legislative process. Her signature does not mean the loan has been definitely implemented. How the process works. In December, after failing to reach an agreement on using frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's war effort, the European Council agreed in principle to provide 90 billion euros to help Kiev meet its budgetary and military needs over the next 2 years. On 14th January, the European Commission put forward a package of legislative proposals to ensure continued financial support for Ukraine in 2026 and 2027. These included a proposal to establish a 90 billion euro Ukraine support loan, amendments to the Ukraine facility, the EU instrument used to deliver budgetary assistance, and changes to the EU's multi-annual financial framework so the loan could be backed by any unused budgetary headroom. Under EU law, these proposals must be adopted by both the European Parliament and the European Council. Because the loan requires amendments to EU budgetary rules, it ultimately needs unanimous approval from all member states. Metsola's signature therefore does not amount to a final decision, nor does it override Hungary's veto. The oil dispute behind Hungary's opposition. Budapest says its objections are linked to disputes over the Druzhba pipeline, a Soviet-era route that carries Russian oil via Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. According to the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, Hungary and Slovakia imported an estimated 137 million euros worth of Russian crude through the pipeline in January alone under a temporary EU exemption. Oil flows reportedly stopped in late January after a Russian airstrike that Kiev says damaged the pipeline's southern branch in western Ukraine. Hungary disputes this, with Prime Minister Viktor Orban accusing Ukraine of blocking it from being used. Speaking in Kiev alongside European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said the pipeline had been damaged by Russia, not Kiev. He added that repairs were dangerous and could not be carried out quickly, putting Ukrainian servicemen in danger. Tensions escalated further after reports that Ukraine struck a pumping station serving the pipeline. Orban responded by ordering increased security at critical infrastructure sites, claiming Kiev was attempting to disrupt Hungary's energy system. So, you find here that the pipeline was damaged. Ukrainians are saying it was the Russians. The Hungarians are saying it was the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have a history of these manipulative, dastardly attacks on infrastructure. You know, when you look at everything that Volodymyr Zelensky has done, including all the corruption, including, if you recall when Ben Wallace said something along the lines that Zelensky needs to understand that he's not, I paraphrase here, but that he's not ordering off Amazon and when he clicks his fingers, things arrive. The problem here is extremely simple. When the Ukraine debacle kicked off, rather than the Europeans looking to solve the issue, they exacerbated the issue. But furthermore, they created an aura and a myth around Zelensky of a Churchillian-type figure. Someone who was Churchill-like, someone who was going to rally the Europeans and the Ukrainians towards a resounding and thumping defeat of the Russians because of his personality, because these European morons believe that spin is enough to make or break a situation. Pretty much like what Kamala Harris thought was going to be the outcome of her election race between her and Donald Trump. Pump increasingly insane amounts of money into a campaign, hire good PR firms, employ the services of all these top grade musicians and whatever and whoever, and that's enough to make you win an election. And that line of reasoning is based on the premise that the public are gullible, the public are stupid, and the public are easily herded towards a decision. However, the results proved the opposite. Now you have the same thing with Zelensky. This clown and a lot of his mates have been thieving off the money that was being sent to Ukraine. And like a petulant child, every time things don't go his way, he goes out and has a hissy fit, starts blaming everybody but himself for what is going on in Ukraine. And, gaslights the world into believing that it's their fault, and because it's their fault, they have to stand with Ukraine. Whilst we go through hardships here and send our hard-earned cash to him only so that he and his mates can thieve it and go and buy luxury vehicles and that, I really don't think that he deserves anything more from us. However, Keir Starmer, who's another moron, believes otherwise. The point I'm making here is that whether the Ukrainians damaged the line or not is immaterial. The Hungarians believe they did. And Zelensky dragging his feet on the repairing of that makes it even more difficult for him to receive that money, that 90 billion euros that he's been salivating on. He's probably eyeing a Bugatti somewhere or a plush villa somewhere, and that money needs to come in urgently. But him dragging his feet is not going to make matters any better. So, this post on X by this METSOLA person has really set things ablaze. It's just, ruffling the feathers, bringing this back into the fore. I've done a video on this Druzhba pipeline and what it means for Hungary and Slovakia and Ukraine and the EU. I'll put it up somewhere here. Have a listen to it. But again, I'm saying what the Ukrainians, what the Europeans, what the Russians think of this matter is immaterial. The people vetoing it are the Slovakians and the Hungarians. So what they think about this pipeline is what matters. And if they believe that it is the Ukrainians that have sabotaged it, then if I was Zelensky and I was looking at buying a new Veyron or a new villa somewhere and I needed this 90 billion euros to come through, I would pull my finger out and get working on that pipeline immediately so that that money gets sent to me. Because from the sounds of this article, if that doesn't happen, or if cheap Russian oil does not flow, or cheap oil does not flow again to Croatia and Hungary, then that 90 billion euro package is still up there in the ether. So again, I urge you, have a look at this article. It's a good breakdown of it, because while I was doing the video on the Druzhba pipeline, I noticed that these headlines were making the rounds regarding, the pipeline, the circumnavigating of Hungary's veto of that 90 billion euro aid package to Ukraine. And after doing a bit of research, I found that there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So that is why this video is being done. So once again, yeah, have a look at that article. It's quite a interesting read. I want to thank you for spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.